Welcome to Policy on Demand. I'm Sindhu Blume. Last Friday, the Treasury Department and the Office of Management and Budget released the final U.S. federal budget results for FY24. Why is this important? For one thing, it provides context for the fiscal policy debate. And this is a big economic week with the G20 International Monetary Fund and the World Bank meeting here in Washington. Joining us to share his insights on the budget results and the economic meetings is Karl Russo. Karl, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to talk about the final budget results. They show that for FY24, the corporate income tax revenue went up 26% relative to FY23. So let's talk about this and what it could mean for maintaining a 21% corporate tax rate.
Well, several people have been looking at the revenue that's been coming in for corporate income taxes, and it's been much stronger than was predicted before the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was enacted, at least in the last couple of years. This year, they were particularly higher in part due to timing shifts related to disaster declarations in California. Many companies didn't have to make their payments that they normally would have made in 2023 until 2024. That was responsible for about $40 billion or so of additional revenue. But corporate receipts, even adjusting for that effect, have been strong, and surely people who are in favor of maintaining the 21% rate will use that data to support that argument.
All right. Any other nuggets that you took away from this report?
The deficit challenges facing the U.S. Continue to be very robust, and it's going to be an impediment, I think, to some policy objectives that people would like to pursue because they're going to have to figure out more how to pay for them and whether or not that policy can be done in a permanent way or maybe with temporary extensions of the expiring provisions. The fact that we are borrowing as much money as we can is going to serve as some sort of backdrop for that that's going to constrain perhaps some of those desires by policymakers.
All right. And as I mentioned, the G20, World Bank, and IMF are meeting in Washington this week. What can we expect from those meetings?
Well, one of the things that we're expecting is that the IMF will release an update to their World Economic Outlook, which will show their expectations of where the economy is headed for the next year or so. We'll be looking to see what they have in terms of growth, not just in the developed economies, but in the developing world as well, and whether or not the effects of inflation are persistent in some of those different places. Their initial read on the U.S. is that our inflationary pressures have primarily been driven by labor market tightness. And so as we see changes in that landscape, we'll expect to see whether or not their expectations of future inflation will be moderated in the U.S.
All right. And I want to ask a question about after these meetings, typically, what are the next steps? They are putting out reports, but are there decisions that are made which they then will follow up with later?
A lot of what happens at these meetings is an opportunity for those who are making those considerations or have the ears of the policymakers in their respective countries to meet together to try to coordinate some of the things that they think are important on the landscape. And so I expect out of those we'll see taking back the information and the discussions that they have to advocate for changes that will be more supportive of economic growth. You also see there's often an interest on the part of how the developed world can support the developing economies through whether that's trade policy or fiscal policy incentives that they could do for stability in the global economy.
All right, thank you for that. And finally, I know you're speaking with companies, and particularly in an election year, people are focused on the economy. And I want to find out what is the tenor of your meetings, and what are some questions that you're getting?
Well, as we're approaching the election just a few days away now, a lot of companies are trying to figure out what the different policy outcomes could mean for them and for the U.S. economy, particularly in the various different scenarios. It looks like the election is going to be a close one. And so whether or not we have all Republican rule in the presidency, the Senate, and the House, or say a Democratic president with a Democratic House and a Republican Senate could really mean different policy objectives are achievable or not. And so companies are trying to figure out under those different scenarios, what are the possibilities for tax changes, for other policy and regulatory developments in those various states of the world. And so they're continuing to model that and see what it means for them and their bottom line.
Thank you so much, Karl. I really appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me.
For a global perspective on the U.S. election, you'll want to check out Scott McCandless's conversation with Craig Stromberg. A link to it is in the description of this episode, along with the latest Election Watch and Week in Review. You'll also find a link to register for an upcoming tax readiness webcast on future-ready tax functions. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you have a great week. Take care.